Alright, I'm here to do another video to follow up on the video we did earlier for blanked rat theory. So besides fishing rats, after that, on my bait making quest, I started to make the weight hogs because I couldn't find a gill bait that I thought had all the features that I wanted in that style bait. I was fishing a couple baits and getting big bites, and I felt like I was losing them for multiple reasons. One of the reasons, they all have big fins on them. I'm not a fan. Fins on bluegill baits, hard fins at least, because I feel like they impede bites. That's why bluegills are shaped like that. You gotta remember, when bass are targeting bluegills also, they know that it's a very hard shape to eat, and they have very spiny fins. One time when I was a kid, our boxer ate a bluegill, but she ate it tail first, and it got stuck in her throat, and we had to force it out, force it in, but it wouldn't come back out. So we had to shove it down in there, and it wasn't a good scene. So bluegills don't like to get eaten. They have very spiny tops. It's a spiny fish, so and their shape is round. They've evolved this way for a reason. It's not like a threadfin shad or something that's a very fragile bait fish. Bluegills are relatives of bass, so it's a hardy fish. So in my opinion, the fins were helping me lose fish, and I was getting very big bites. I was actually getting lucky, and I was able to get bites, and then I was losing them. So whatever it was, it led me to this, to the original weight hogs, and from there I just really dove into. I was already checking out the bluegill eaters. I was losing them, and then started making baits for them. And you can see on the table I have multiple bluegill baits, all because I live on the Delta, and it's a prevalent bait fish, but it's also everywhere you go. So throughout the year you can target fish that eat bluegills and panfish, red ear, whatever it is. In the wintertime, I know where to find the bluegills. I don't fish a lot in the wintertime on the Delta now. This is the Delta. But, they school up. So if you do have a lake with crappie, bluegill, I'm sure there might be a bite to exploit over some deep rock piles, or, whatever it may be. They hold on vertical hard structure out here. But, I'm not going to comment on that because it's not the dominant pattern most places in the wintertime. But as the year moves on, fish get more active. My magic number is 53 degrees. When it's 53 degrees, I'm throwing a wake bait. Now, whether it be a baby bass wake bait or a big split tail wake bait, or my trucha like a golden shiner, whatever it may be, I'm throwing a wake bait. Earlier in the year, I lean on the bigger ones, but the Wade hogs, for some reason, it's a good choice. It's a great wake bait. I think bluegills start to get active with the bass. I don't think they move up as fast. So, so I start using it lightly when the water hits 53 and it's warming up and the fish are starting to get around and stage and move in on lakes, secondary points or creek channels. They start following them in. If you have a weedy impoundment, that's probably when it's going to come into play. When you do start to get that first weed growth, or when they get on that wood that's on the edges of the creeks. Riprap early in the year with wake baits can be great. Probably because the bass are there, not because they're targeting bluegill, but for whatever reason, they always seem to eat it. Now, when I move into the later 50s, wherever that may be, I focus on length of day and then temperature. So even if it's getting late in the year, if it's pushing and it's staying cold, the fish know that the days are getting longer, and they figure out how to get their metabolism up sometime through the day and feed. That's when you just have to start looking for the active pockets in the areas, you know, when the water starts getting the upper 50s and the 60s, it really starts to break loose on slow waking the wade hogs or a bluegill wake bait. Up top, it seems like they really want to target up top early in the year like that. I don't know if it irritates them. That time of year is even when with wake baits, I like to have a little ripple even, but that time of year, you could just reel it as slow as you can and let it whack on top, and they'll start coming up and really bombing on it. And you got to remember, when they're eating bluegills, like I said, they're hard to eat. So when they eat a bluegill bait, a lot of times they're really going to hit it, because if you've seen a bass eat a big bluegill or any, you know, a larger bluegill, you know, if we're talking about a swim bait size, this is a decent sized bait to fit in a fish's mouth, because they're really thinking about eating it. You know, they're not like us, like, oh, is it big enough to eat it? And we think, yeah, well, it can fit down its mouth, and bass can eat a lot of stuff. But the bass really has to plan this out. I mean, it's not like eating a normal shiner bait fish. So they'll really, you know, a lot of times they'll eat a bluegill, and if they don't get it head first, they'll just crush it, and they'll, you know, and kind of stun it so they can reposition on it, just like a spotted bass would pull a claw off of a crawdad maybe before they ate it. You know, a lot of times spots will peck at the craws of crawdads because they pull them off, and then they'll just smoke that thing, because, you know, it's just like with the rat bait. We talk about rat theories. They gotta crush that thing, you know, because they're, you know, it's a mean dude, and these guys will get stuck in the throat. We've all seen the pictures of the bass floating with a big ass panfish in his throat. So anyways, as it's moving in, I think the bass are aggressive, bluegills are around, and the bass have spawning on their mind. So when spawning on their mind, it's just an instinctual thing. They know that bluegills are the enemy of that, and the bluegills will eat all of their eggs, you know, or do what they can. There's not much that I don't think they can do about the carp. On the delta, the carp can move in and be like Hoovers too, but you know, the bluegills are really active. They're annoying. You can see how they move in the water. You know, they'll dart around. They just kind of hang around the bass beds like loiterers. You know, linger. They just linger around. So when they're doing that, you know, the bass are really targeting them early. I've noticed that before the bass get on the beds, when they start to target those bluegill, bass really like the overhead cover early in the year, at least for me. If you find any overhead cover, shade pockets, anything like that, where the bass can feel comfortable being near the water, the top of the water column, it seems like those fish really like to target the bluegill. Now, I'll be cranking bluegills down. The wade 3 cranks down. I really like the wade 3 for cranking down the chorizo. Get it down in their face a little bit, knock it off a cover. If you have wood cover and you got to get it down, definitely get it down. With weedy impoundments, I think you really want them to eat up, because like I said, if you get that bass and you get them eating down on this thing, when they eat down, you know, they will miss the hook sometimes because it's a big bait. So you want to find that happy medium of where those fish are, and a lot of times, even though it's not on the surface, it's just a foot down. So before the fish are locked on, but especially like the last 2-3 weeks, this really starts to become like the only thing that I like to throw and becomes a player. Before that, I might switch it up, move it around. But the bluegill baits, I start focusing like right before they lock on beds. I don't bed fish. If you're in tournaments and you know an area that they're bedding and they're tough fish though, you can take these baits and cast them in an area. Like I have areas where I can fan cast areas where the fish will be in various locations on a weed flat, and just slow reel it on. In our area, it'd be a low tide, but that's because our fish put beds in the areas that at low tide still have the minimal amount of water on them. In your lake, you know, they might be locked up shallow, so you just have to wake this thing slowly with the tail just wagging around, and a lot of times you could really smack them. I've caught more 4-pound fish doing that. You know, you get aggressive big males or you know, smaller fish, not the mamacitas that seem to do that, but that's a technique that you could use. You know, it still is, you're pulling fish off a bed, so but I understand the guys that are out in tournaments, or if you just want to go catch fish. I mean, not everybody can can smack them. So if there is an area, that's an option for you. I suggest getting them back in the water so they can do their duty. They are fish; they're not imbeciles. You can put them back in; they'll find their way back. You just got to get them back soon. So after that, I'm not a bed fisherman, so I might do that a little bit. But usually, in every body of water, you can find pre-spawn, post-spawn, and spawning fish. There's, it's never one wave. So they move up around the full moon. The weeks before and after the full moon can really be good, as usual. But with the bluegill baits, especially to get out at night, you can really target them. So that's like the early season. I think like early in the year, the fish are aggressive. Springtime, right? You can throw whatever. You throw a chatterbait, spinner baits, all the different stuff can imitate bluegills. This is what I'm targeting them with. This is a great bluegill imitator. A regular frog, is a great bluegill imitator. A swim jig, a chatterbait, soft swim bait, 316 bluegill. I think there's the unique, the trash fish. There's the 13 fishing. There's a ton of options out there. But after you move out, after the fish spawn, they're in post-spawn funk. I think that's when this, that bluegill bite really starts to shine. I love summer fishing with swim baits. I love it. Maybe it's where I'm from, whatever it is. I know the fish aren't at their biggest. That's not the most important thing for me. I'm not really worried about that. Early in the year, trust me, I'm out there trying to get the bites, but I like summer. I like to just pound on them. So when the fish get off of their beds, they're in a funk. You got a week or two. But the key is they get off right when their funk is starting to they're kind of swimming around and they're getting their bearings back. The bluegills seem to move in. So when the bluegills move in on the beds, you just have to find hard bottom areas they can sweep out. Or, they might be silt covered, but you want rocks under there. Shell beds are good. In bluegill beds, you'll see a lot of shells. I don't know if they sweep out above the shells or they bring them in, but on the delta, we're looking for sand, certain things like that. When you see bluegills, if you see something that looks like a bunch of craters, like the moon, on your depth finder, side finder, things like this, those are bluegill beds. Now, when they first get on there, first wave, they make them. Bluegills will cycle through those. Just because the dishes are still there doesn't mean the fish are there as it moves in here, April, May, whatever they show up. It's easy to stay locked on these beds. You got to know when to leave. So the key when targeting bluegill beds, when the fish are on their beds, there's fish back, there's fish up. They're very aggressive. Bluegills are mean as hell. You're probably going to see bass roaming amongst the beds. Now, I've never really got those. Every once in a while, you can pitch those things like a gets it. You want to pitch them a gets it or a tube bait, and you could real light finessey. Seems like they only eat the tube bait for whatever reason for me, but sometimes you can get those fish. But when you're targeting these beds, you don't target the beds for the bass. You want to target the closest piece of substantial cover to these beds. Now, if it's in a bay, you might have multiple options for there. Overhead mat, a tree, a weed clump, a rock pile, a boulder. I don't know the lakes that you're fishing, but if you have bluegills and they're spawning, the bass are going to position out from this area in the best possible ambush position, and they're patient, so they wait. So you could go in and get those fish. I fish a lot of mats, overhead hyacinth, and a lot of times it'll be 20, 30 yards from the bed, and you go up there with a wake or you go up there with a punch, and you're able to trick that fish because the fish out in the flats can be harder to trick. Now at night, you could really wreck them because the fish aren't worried about being up shallow or the bluegills even seeing them. They're really stealthy, so they get a little more busy. But in the daytime, you look around, even if it's 50 yards, like bluegills are cycling in and out, and the fish are resting there, and then they'll move up. They'll move up in packs a lot of times. There'll be 3 to 4 fish, and they'll kind of like patrol. They'll patrol an area. Not so much as they do in the summer as when they're on beds, but they can't start that behavior there. So my best advice when you find them on the beds is fish them hard. If you can go at night, definitely go at night. Fish the areas around the beds. I think the fish are staging there, and they move up to feed, but I've really been able to target them better when they're in their cover or whatever it is where they're holding around the beds. Now, I do this every year. I've been doing it in a while. It works. I'm sure every body of water is different. There could be a bite, that you just throw it in there in the bluegill beds and they crush it. It happens sometimes, but I'm saying for the most part, the bass really like to position areas around the beds where they hang out, and then they go on their little swim patrol, and then they'll come back. Like they do this little patrol thing. It's when they started. I'm going to talk about that next. So as the bluegill come off the beds, you'll notice the beds just get really silted in, ugly looking, and the bass have already been targeting these fish, and they know they're gone. So where the bluegill goes next, I'm not real good with fish fry. I've been out here all this time, and all the fry, when they're tiny, look the same. I'm sure bluegill fry are really small, and I never notice if they're guarding them or not. They kind of just start. You just notice the smaller bluegill everywhere. The bigger ones always hold deeper. They're up for the spawn and they're out. So as you move into the summer, the post, like when it's really post spawning, right early summer, that's when this actually starts to come a little better. As a more versatile bait, like the snapper, because there's a lot of smaller fish that are up. In the areas, say late May, June, into July, and that's when I start using. I still use everything here. Like I still throw the big baits, but when the average size goes down, it makes sense to downsize. Now, one of the best bluegill imitators you could throw in the summertime is a frog. Fred Urban has proved it over and over again, and that's why that color is called Fred Frog. But he used it. He designed the bait, and then he won a tournament, crushed a tournament using it the way that he talked about. Like that was, that's dope. That was fire. So it's a proven technique in the Delta. We do it all the time. If you have bluegill eaters, for whatever reason, you can target those fish that are eating a bluegill with a frog, like a snag proof or the Sanford frog that Fred, that's his signature model. But I know there's a ton of great frogs. I hear good stuff about scum frog. I hear good stuff about spro. So whatever it is for you, the overseas stuff, whatever it is, if you use a bluegill color, that's definitely an option for these stuff. All these will work, but it's not always windy, and sometimes it can be really clear in the summer. So you want to use what you can to target these fish. If you get a real windy day, that's a real turbulent water, you could really clean up on a bluegill spinnerbait or a blanked live wire, because it has a chatterbait blade on the front. Chatterbait, swim bait, swim jig. Swim jig is a perfect profile. If you take this off, and this was a swim jig with a trailer, it's like a round little bluegill. So all those are great options, but you have to just remember where the fish are. So the bluegills are up shallow. They're going to be smaller size. If you want to get a lot more bites in the summer, you could definitely use a bluegill frog, a whippersnapper. I prefer to throw the big stuff, so this frog definitely gets chunked and chewed in June to July, August, September, and it can for multiple reasons, because it's a frog, but in bluegill colors, I think it attracts them because they're so targeted on maybe that orange spot or whatever. So in the summer, early morning, if the wind's up, anytime that I'm able to make a larger presentation, make it stand out, I'm definitely throwing the big gill. I throw rats, I throw everything, but I don't think there's a better producer than a big gill wake from early summer through fall. There's weedless bluegills. Those are awesome. You just have to do your research and find them. So the fish are targeting these gills. So it's easy to kind of watch how they do and what they do. So when you're on the water, notice where they're at. Notice if they're holding to certain stuff. It makes a difference, because you don't have to come up to the fish. If they're holding on wood, like I said, stay back from a tree or wherever that looks next, and then look at what's around it. Look at what isolated cover is around that piece of wood, because just because there's a cloud of bluegills doesn't mean that the fish are holding right on them. But they know they're there, and they definitely like to eat them. Riprap, marinas, overhead cover, like I said, any weedy stuff. You guys in the wooded lakes, I have limited experience, but I know in the south when I went back, the bluegills are there, but definitely not as prevalent as they are in weedy environments. So, but like Florida, when I went to Florida, the things I seen there is just these bluegill baits could be exploited there. So as the summer moves on, it's just a great bait. You know how summer goes. A lot of guys don't like to throw swim baits in the summer. If you're throwing a bluegill swim bait in the summer, I think that's your best, besides a rat. But even over the rat, like for most people, I think the bluegill wake bait, crank down, hard bait style bait, it's hard to beat. The soft baits work also, awesome too. But I feel like in the summer they're so aggressive. Early in the day, late in the day, anytime you have a chance where the fish might get active, a little bit of wind around the moon phases, you're definitely going to want to throw this. You can get the biggest bites of the year. My biggest bites of the year literally come at the end of August and September into October a lot of times on these baits. So in the late summer, that's probably why the bigger fish are targeting them again, because these bluegills that were small, like I'm talking, that moved up early in the summer have grown over the months, and they've grown into larger bluegill. The bigger fish are feeding up. They know it's getting colder. Here, true fall seems to be late October, November, into December, because it's California. So I really throw this thing right until the fall sets in. I know some of my guys that throw them, they throw them all year and crack. But I notice that the bluegills really get up on flats, and at the end of the year, the bigger bluegills, for whatever reason, get up on flats and coves, scattered weed beds. They get kind of shallow right before the fall comes in, and the really big bass move up and target them. Now, I fish so much at the Delta, I believe that every body of water is different. So it could be a little different in the area, but every lake I've gone, I've been out to plenty of lakes, even when I'm not fishing, and I'm a freak, so I'm always looking at fish. So when the bluegill disappear, that's when that happens. When you stop seeing the bluegill, you got about a week to 2 weeks that they're still around. They're just bunkered up a little bit. I don't know if they're down in the weeds eating more bugs or snails or whatever they're doing, but they kind of disappear. But when they're not noticeable as much, you get some warm nights, they'll come out. Don't get me wrong. End of the day, but you just kind of notice that it's starting to slow down, and they're backing off. They're not as much. That's when this is all I'm throwing. This swim jig, wake bait. They really like the swim jig at the end of the year. It seems like the bluegill eaters, spinner bait, but soft bait. But right when you think that the bluegills are done, that's when the bite goes. That's when it's good. Like the wake bait, but late summer, just throw the biggest bluegill wake you could get away with, wherever late summer is for you. If you get out late in the day, that's even better. Now this is gill theory. I'm trying to tell you guys about gill activities and why the bass relate to them. I don't know why the big fish move up and eat these wakes at the end of the year. I mean, it happens everywhere. All short pound lakes I go to everywhere. Like at the end of the summer, they really are like, holy crap, man, I need to eat these bluegills. And the girls move up. And those fish that people want to catch in the winter because they're so fat, at the end of the summer, they're substantial fish. They have a high metabolism, and it's, the days are cooling and they're feeding up, so they're not in their summer skinny bodies. It's the end. It's like beginning of fall into summer, and they'll start packing on the pounds, and you could really stack some weight on a bluegill wake bait. Into the fall, I mean, it's always been for me that they switch to not only junk fishing, so of course I'm gonna have one on, but it seems like they switch more to a bait fish style and even feed up on crawdads a little bit. So, I haven't done the best on those. Now, when you're targeting these things, I'm talking about these big wakes. I feel like the glides, like this castle ball, or maybe like a Piz, the Piz Beast Glide. I don't know what it's called, to be honest with you. His bluegill panfish shaped glides. He actually came out. I was throwing the wake. I got a bunch of bites that were about 4 pounds. He caught like an 8 or whatever that sucker was, throwing the glide in flat, clear water. So that's how I make my decisions on my hard baits is, like if it's real clear and I feel like the, lip bait's obtrusive, I'm going to throw a glide in there. So, you definitely want to have your whole lineup and adjust your bait presentation to the conditions. There's no magic bullet for these fish. So when it's not windy or something, or their fish aren't shallow and you can't throw these wakes, doesn't mean anything. Just if the bluegills are in 6 feet, hold it in 6 feet on a weed line, then definitely grab a soft bait, something you could get down there, a chatterbait, a swim bait, pop it through the weeds. Because you gotta remember that bluegills are jerky and you can, pop them around, so the fish will come out and react. But into the winter, like I said, I don't really, they move out, they'll suspend. I know that people fish crappie, because they'll school up as it gets cold. They'll throw crappie swim baits. But the bluegill can carry you through most of the year, from just pre-spawn until late fall. Everywhere you go, you can have this in your back pocket. Farm ponds. If you have bluegills, you have a bite for this. Whether it be these hard baits, whether you like to throw frog style baits, swim jig, spinner bait, the list goes on and on. Pop bars are great because because bluegills like to hit up near the surface, especially at the end of the day. The end of the day is when you're really going to want to throw stuff that stays at the surface, because bluegills like to seem to get up there and eat bugs in the warm evening, and they'll be blooping and popping around. So if there's a true time to throw it, it's definitely in the pre-sunset into the day. But I would definitely throw this wherever you go. I didn't know the potential of this bait when I started throwing it. We caught so many here, I thought, oh man, this is awesome. But it's literally caught really big fish, I think, everywhere it's gone. Even my buddy Travis Evans, I'll put him on blast a little bit. He hasn't been able to fish. We all get busy. He doesn't post anything either. He's a stud. But I try to, I ask about the bite out there, and it's so humid and messed up out, in the south and stuff, and the water temps get really hot. When I heard the water temps, Jesus, huge water temps, and I'm like, man, that's crazy, because I figured there'd be some bite because it's so good, it works everywhere. And then last year in the summer, he went out and he threw it all day, I guess, and smacked them. I don't know if he won his club tournament or big fish, but he got some good bites in the summer when it's traditionally tough. So, that makes me smile because I gave him the bait and it worked for him. And maybe next year if he has a chance, he'll want to go out and have some confidence and smack as a swim bait fish and not have to throw the small stuff. But if you have gills in your lake and you're not trying to exploit the bite, that's the point of this video. Is just follow what they do. Remember that the fish relate to cover around the bluegills, especially in the bedding season. And remember to target these fish, and when they eat it, they're going to eat it aggressively. So you might get fish that smoke a bait and spit it, but they'll come back a lot of times because they're just trying to hit it. Like, stay steady, stay confident, find what bluegill. There's no magic bullet. If this is too much for you, great, and you want to throw a swim bait, trash fish makes a bait, unique makes a gill. It's very similar. There's weedless stuff available if you like soft baits. Burrito baits, like I said, Piz makes gill baits. Black Dog has always made gill baits. But don't go with the small stuff. They'll eat this. This is nothing. Me and Danny catch so many fish on this. Everybody I know that I talk to, you catch 1-2 pounders on it all the time. So just get out there, pay attention. They're so easy to watch. Even if you walk the shore of your local pond, you could watch bluegill for hours and see how they relate. And I guarantee if you get a bird's eye position of bluegills shallow for a decent amount of time, you're going to see bass patrolling the area. They swim back and forth and they patrol the area and they wait for one to slip up. So remember that. Just because they're not in an area 10 minutes ago, you can check it again because those bluegill really like to stay put, and it's like a buffet line. Bass just have to wait for them to mess up, and they always mess up. So get out there, throw some bluegill baits. It's coming up. Spring's coming up. Depending on the part of the country you're in, whatever month it is. I can't fish till March, or I'm not going to. So March is definitely a good time to start if you live in warmer states. And then after that, even as soon as the ice goes out, you can start throwing it. But if you pay attention to bluegill behavior, pay attention when they bed, when they come off beds, when the size changes, and then progressively upsize from early summer to late summer, you'll capitalize on some of the biggest bites, or you could get some of the biggest bites of the year. So thanks for stopping in.